Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we're going to be talking about the 2024 NFL Draft class of the Houston Texans based on production, athleticism, and other statistical factors. So we're going to grade each and every single pick based on analytics. We're going to be looking at all of the data in regards to every single draft pick the Houston Texans selected. Stay tuned until the end of the video where I reveal what the final grade is for the Houston Texans. But before we get into all of this grading, there's a couple things you have to know as a new viewer to understand the grades. So first off, you have to know draft pick approximate value. You can pause the video here real quick, but essentially I grade picks based on what the expectation is of where they were drafted and what the data potential says about them overall. So when you look at draft pick approximate value, it tells you what the expectation is based on their approximate value score. So essentially, most prospects taken between picks 1 through 5 have a 98% chance of becoming a long-term starter or all-pro, Pro Bowl player, those kinds of things. So basically, they're 98% better than the vast majority of the NFL. That's typically what you're going to find at pick 1 through 5. And based on this information, we get to the data grades, which is another aspect of it is I grade these draft picks based on the data grade of the prospect because a lot of times the data grade can inform you about what the potential is at the next level. If you want to learn more about this specific metric, go to my top 50 prospects video where I get into all the details in terms of my methodology, the correlations at the various positions, the depth of it, and all that other sort of information can be found there as well. Getting to another thing, which is limiting factors. So these are some of the things that can affect the status of the draft picks because, again, we're talking about probability. We're not talking about certainty. So there are a lot of things or blind spots to the data that are displayed right here. You can kind of pause the video and kind of read about that. But let's get to the Houston Texans' needs. So before we get into the actual draft, what would the Houston Texans really need to draft? So this takes a look at all of the prospects on the Texans right now based on their approximate value scores, which is how they actually performed. It's not based on data, it's based on how they actually performed on the football field. And based on this data, the Texans are a pretty strong team overall when you just look at it here. But they do have some weaknesses in terms of like the center position. They probably could get some help with defensive tackle. The strong side linebacker position could also need some work. Jeffrey Okude is somebody who is a little inconsistent. He does have potential based on data to improve himself, but these are some of the concerns based on data. Now, this based on that sheet that I just showed you, these are the overall things that the Texans probably should be looking for in the draft. One of those is a tight end, running back, and wide receiver. Maybe not so much, but you could see that they can improve a little bit there. Offensive line was a 7 rank in terms of the rest of the NFL, so maybe offensive line isn't the biggest deal for them. But defensively, yes, defensive tackle and safety, those are the two biggest needs. Biggest reasons why Jimmy Ward is an older safety. He's 33 years old, and his performances have been inconsistent. So he's somebody that I think they might want to target to get a safety in there to kind of, step in and maybe become the starter long term there if Jimmy Ward doesn't turn out well this year or in the future, somebody needs to take over that spot. With all that stuff out of the way, the final factors in terms of my final grades, I look at did they meet their roster needs? So the biggest needs that I could identify is a tight end, a tackle, and a safety. Did they draft good prospects? Because if you don't draft good prospects, you're probably going to be drafting that same guy again next year. So that's going to be another thing I'm grading. And then did the draft prospects have the data potential to outperform their draft status? Based on the work that I've done, typically speaking, 70 percentile and higher is a data grade that you want to get to ensure you end up in that range of possibilities of having the best chance of becoming a long-term starter at the position. Typically, players that are below 70 percentile have a much lower representation in the NFL, and as a result, you probably shouldn't be drafting those prospects, especially in the later rounds where most of those players end up not really becoming much. But at the same time, what if they did? What if you drafted a player that did? And that's what gives the draft value. Drafts are really most important, not necessarily in the first 3 rounds, but in the very end of the draft. That's where team building is done, is in the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh round. So that is where we're going to be grading them out in terms of this draft. Starting with pick 42, Kamari Lassiter, cornerback out of Georgia. Based on his data grade, he didn't test that well. He had a 53.94 out of 100. His projected floor, which is the average approximate value for cornerbacks who tested like him in that range of possibilities at, pick 42, was 65.51 with a balanced grade of 59.72, which basically balances the floor and the ceiling for him. The average approximate value for prospects taken at that pick, though, is 84.56. So I would give this pick overall a F. When you look at the data potential of Kamari Lassiter from a data perspective, and you look at what's usually expected at pick 42, he's giving up way too much value. And again, the average AV of prospects who tested like Kamari Lassiter based on his overall data grade, which takes a look at his production, his athleticism, his other sort of factors, is such that he's only going to end up possibly becoming a 65 percentile player, which is sort of a backup, but you want somebody who can outperform that, and that's the biggest issue with his profile. But let's get into the data. Why did he test so poorly? So we're going to take a look at that. So first off, production. He had a 50 percentile solo tackle score with 64 percentile in terms of pass deflections and 12 percentile in terms of interceptions. His interception scores are really, really low. It's below the Pro Bowl threshold, so there's never been a cornerback to have multiple Pro Bowl selections that had below a 17 percentile interception score, which is scary. And really kind of limits his upside to being just a starter in many ways. Now, when he gets his athleticism traits, this is where he was really inconsistent, downright weird, because at the combine he did really well in terms of the short shoulder and the three cone, with the 73 percentile overall flexibility score, which is kind of like the change of direction athleticism trait. But when you look at his speed scores, 9.73, that's what he ran at his pro day. So unless he is faster than this, it's kind of really hard to kind of project him because that speed score is really, really low. He has good change of direction skills, don't get me wrong, but this is a case where he really might need to work out in more of a zone scheme. Maybe that's what they're running in Houston. Again, I don't really watch the film. I look at the data aspects of things, so maybe they're looking at him as sort of a nickel or a zone corner type guy, but based on his athleticism traits, this is not getting it done. He's somebody who, based on these traits, he could be a major liability in terms of man coverage. So we'll just have to see. And then in terms of adjusted production traits, he had a great age score, but his pass score wasn't exactly where you wanted to be. So that's a concern. Then, of course, we get to pick 59 and Blake Fisher, offensive tackle out of Notre Dame. His data score or potential score is 86 percentile. His floor for tackles that tested like him in his range was 78.39, and balance grade is 82.65 out of 100. His pick AV is 74.13, with an overall pick grade being a B. Taking a look at his athleticism traits, 70 percentile in terms of explosiveness, 58 percentile in terms of speed, and 57 percentile in terms of flexibility for his size. When you look at the starter averages, guys, this is the biggest thing right here. When you look at the starter averages right here, he doesn't quite hit all the averages at the position that you really want him to hit, which is a bit of a concern. However, he does at least have above the starter threshold. The starter threshold is right here. That is definitely something that really works for him. So from this perspective, he does have some risk involved with him, but he did test well enough to be a potential starter. And I think as a sort of backup rotational piece, I think he would do well, which is kind of how he tested. 86 percentile is not really a long-term starter, as much as sort of a backup rotational offensive lineman. So that may not be what they view him as, but that is kind of how he tested based on his athleticism traits. Then, of course, we get to pick 78 and Calen Bullock, defensive safety out of USC. This is by far my favorite pick. I mean, there are some question marks with him, but I really like his data. 93.99 in terms of his data grade. His floor is 67.22 with a balanced grade of 80.85. And most prospects taken at pick 78 is 71 percentile, regardless of position. So I would give this overall grade A. Based on his overall traits, when you look at his solo tackle score, which is right here, in terms of solo tackle, 60 percentile. Not the best, but definitely decent. But the biggest thing to really look at is his interception and pass deflection data, which is right here. This area right here, 87 percentile in terms of interceptions, and then 92 percentile in terms of pass deflections. That's a great number to have for a prospect like this. So I do really like his profile from that kind of perspective, production wise. And then when you get to athleticism, this is the reason why he fell as far as he did. 42 percentile in terms of his speed score, which is not the best. And then look at this right here, the explosion score, 7.20 percentile in terms of explosion. There's never been a long-term free safety with a 7 percentile explosion score based on the data work that I've done so far. Now, the position has gotten smaller, because he is a underweight safety is kind of how I would put it. So a lot of the skill position players have gotten smaller and smaller. I think a lot of that is because of the spread offenses taking over college football. Typically, those positions start to get smaller because of how up tempo those offenses are. But that is a little bit of a concern. I mean, it is something that kind of dropped him down a little bit. But when you look at his adjusted production traits, again, adjusted production is taking a look at production for this right here: strength of schedule, strength of team, and then the age of a prospect. And when you take a look at those factors right here, great all around ability right here in terms of, being that 90 percentile area, in terms of that. So he has potential to become a really great safety despite his athleticism traits not testing that well. I'm not going to go as far as to say he's going to be an all pro player, but he potentially could be that despite his athleticism traits issues. But he is a risky pick. He is risky, but I do like his production traits to possibly win the day in this particular case. Then, of course, we get to pick 123 and Cade Stover, tight end out of Ohio State. His data grade was 59.86 out of 100. His projected floor is 37 percentile, 48 percentile for his balance grade, and then the average AV at this selection is 30.12 out of 100. Taking a look at his production traits, as you can see right here, this production right here is not the best. It doesn't really hit the starter averages right here, the Pro Bowl averages, or the All Pro averages, which is kind of where you want him to be. He does hit above at least the Pro Bowl threshold, though, which is right here, but I don't really consider him to be a Pro Bowler because when you look at his efficiency scores, he didn't really do so hot in terms of RAV, which is this number right here, which takes a look at yards per reception. And then when you look at TD percentage, that also wasn't the best either. And then you have to look at his athleticism traits where there was some unique athleticism traits here. He had an 80.73 percentile speed score. That's a good number to have, athletically speaking. But his flexibility score was really low, 32 percentile. And look at the starter averages. Look at the Pro Bowl averages. Look at the All Pro averages. All of those tight ends were at least above average in terms of flexibility traits. So I do like that speed score right there. That is something that potentially could make him an outlier, but it is concerning because of his flexibility testing. And then, of course, we get to adjusted production traits, which takes a look at his age, his level of competition, and the team that he was on. And again, look at the All Pro average right here, and then look at his numbers right here. Not really where you want to be in terms of long-term outcomes here. So I do understand the fact. Okay, the Texans need a tight end, but they might have taken the wrong tight end. I really do believe that there was some tight ends that fell in the draft, which again we don't know really what they're going to become long term, but they had much better data, they had better production traits, they had better athleticism traits in some ways that could have been better for them to kind of improve that area. So Cade Stover I think has the potential to become a long term starter, but at the same time he also has a pretty high bust potential. Where you might underperform his draft status in many ways. And his draft status wasn't really that great to begin with. So we'll kind of see what happens with him, but that's just kind of how the data falls for him. Then, of course, we get to pick 188 and Jamal Hill, linebacker out of Oregon. His data grade was 48.53. Floor grade was 29.62. Balance grade was 39.07. With a pick AV of 28.96, and overall pick grade would be a F. Based on his traits, again, here we go again. Below average production traits. Looking at his production traits right here, doesn't quite hit the starter average, the Pro Bowl average, the All Pro average, all those different areas. That's typical for those types of players. Starter is like 64 starts or more in their career. When you look at his other linebacker traits, he did well in terms of forced fumble market share, which is this number right here, 90 percentile in terms of forced fumbles. Did also well in terms of pass deflection data, 70 percentile in terms of that area right here, but very low interception percentile. which again, interceptions are not the best, not the most crazy thing ever that you really need to have at the linebacker position, but that is something of note that he did really not have that many opportunities to kind of make plays on the football. But then you get to his athleticism traits. This might have been why he was drafted. Really good speed score, 88 percentile in terms of speed. But look at the explosion score, 22 percentile. Look at the flexibility score, 46 percentile. These are not the things that you want to see at the position with him. So that is a little bit of a concern. And then, of course, you get to adjusted production traits. Adjusted production takes a look at age, strength of schedule, strength of team, pass score, all that kind of stuff. And based on this stuff, he is close to the starter averages, but no dice, not really there 100%. So he could potentially become a starter, but he might be an inefficient starter based on his production traits in college. Then, of course, we get to pick 205 and Jawhar Jordan, running back out of Louisville. Based on his data grade, he had a 46 percentile data grade, which isn't the best. Floor grade was 38 percentile. Balanced is 42. Pick AV is 30. Overall pick grade, I would give this one an F. Taking a look at his production traits, uh, slightly above average in every single area, of course, in terms of production. But when you look again, the starter averages, the Pro Bowl averages, the All Pro averages, doesn't quite hit within that range of possibilities there. Then when you look at his other things, he did have good efficiency, his yards per touch and yards per reception and touch AV, all those areas were really close to the 70 percentile right here. But when you get to his athleticism traits, this is the biggest bomb in terms of his overall profile, just how unathletic he is. So again, 22 percentile explosion, 25 percentile, I'd say 26 percentile speed if you round up, and then 21.55 in terms of flexibility. Not the best athleticism traits. And again, most starters are this good. They're this high. They're this high in terms of All Pro, Pro Bowl, and starter averages. So nowhere near that area. So very unlikely for him to really do much at the next level. But we'll see. Then, of course, you get to adjusted production traits where he has a very low age score, 1.83, in fact, which is incredibly low. And then when you look at his MSA rating and his pass rating, all those areas are okay, but not the best. So I don't really know what the thinking was in terms of this selection. I think there was better running backs on the table there in many ways, but unfortunately, it is what it is. Like Blake Watson, I think would be a much better selection here if you're trying to get like a change of pace back, if you will, that has great athleticism traits. He's very old, but so is this guy. So if you don't care about age, take Blake Watson. Don't take a guy who probably is not going to become much at the next level, but we'll see. Then, of course, you get to pick 238 and Solomon Byrd, edge at USC. His data grade is 49.33. Floor grade is 25.83. And then balance grade is 37.58. The overall pick AV of where he was selected is 19.31. Overall grade for this one would be a F. Based on his production traits. He was above average in terms of his solo tackle, sack, and TFL data right there. But when you look at his efficiency traits, not the best in terms of pass deflection data. Did pretty good in terms of forced fumbles, but again, there was issues in terms of athleticism traits. He is a tremendously below average athlete at the position. Doesn't quite hit the starter averages, the Pro Bowl averages, All Pro averages. All those areas are not exactly where you want it to be. And then you get to his adjusted production traits, where he's nowhere near again the starter average. So like this is the starter average pretty much. The bar is set right here, and he has this much of a difference in terms of hitting that bar, and that's a big difference there. So that's kind of the biggest issue with him in terms of his adjusted production traits. So most likely going to be mostly a backup, rotational guy, maybe a reserve player long term. And then, of course, you get to Marcus Harris, defensive tackle out of Auburn. Data grade 24 percentile, 25 percentile floor, 24.66 in terms of balance grade. Overall AV at this pick is usually 6.18. Again, a lot of people hate on me because I judge the seventh rounder so harshly when most of them really only become this right here. But again, you want to take players that can outperform their draft status. Brock Purdy was Mr. Irrelevant, but he also had an 80 percentile overall data grade. So he had the potential to outperform his draft status, and he ended up being the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers that maybe was a missing piece to get him to the Super Bowl. Now, they didn't win it, but I mean, that's still pretty darn good for Mr. Irrelevant, if you will. So make sure you're drafting prospects that can outperform their draft status. I'm telling you guys, do it. Then, of course, you get to his market share production, above average in some ways. I think TFL production was the best aspect of his production. And then, of course, when you look at his other traits in terms of production, good interception market share, pass deflection, and forced fumbles was below average. But athleticism is a big thing. A lot of these seventh rounders do not have athletic upside. They barely have production, and they don't have any athletic upside, a lot of them. So this is not exactly what you want to be taking this late. Again, now there might be other things that they like about them. They might like the coach, they might like the player, they might like the work ethic, all that kind of stuff. And I can respect that. I can. But as a data guy, I'm looking for players that are potentially going to become better overall compared to statistics. And these players have really low chances of becoming starters or anything really at the next level based on their overall data grades, and especially for how low they were drafted. So this is not the best class when you go through the entire class. So and then, of course, in terms of adjusted production traits, 60.65, not the best. And then, of course, you look at the other data traits, not the best either. And then the last player, Ladarius Henderson, guard from Michigan, pretty good data grade, 77 percentile. The floor grade is 41, balance is 59, and the pick AV is 2.7. Overall grade for this one would be a C for him. And based on athleticism traits, he does have above average speed with below average flexibility, but he is playing the guard position where guards can kind of get away with less athleticism overall. Although, again, looking at the All Pro averages, looking at the Pro Bowl averages, looking at the starter averages, most guards have above average athleticism traits, which he doesn't quite have. So overall, final grade for the Houston Texans, I would give them an F. Did they meet all of their roster needs? I would say yes and no. They did take prospects that I think could fill needs here and there, but they're gambles essentially. Calen Bullock has a great production profile, but athleticism is not existent. You look at Cade Stover, great speed score, but production is not really there, and then has a really bad flexibility score. So I could go down the list of all the prospects in this class where there's some things to like about them, but overall they have a lot of liabilities in terms of their data profiles. Does this mean they're going to become busts? Again, I don't like to bust a player before they even start playing football, but they just didn't test that well. And again, if you continually play the lottery over and over again, you will have a chance of winning, but you're also going to have a lot of losing tickets. And I think that's what the Texans unfortunately did in this particular draft class. Now, the Texans I think will be okay. The roster before they entered this draft was very strong, so it's not like they really need this draft class to hit. I mean, I know they want to kind of get more momentum from last season and in terms of getting more prospects, but I think overall, they didn't really do what they needed to do to really position themselves as a forefront power in the AFC South. They might still end up winning the AFC South because of the quarterback that they have and the offense that they have, but I think they still have some roster needs that weren't really addressed that could have been addressed in the draft. So overall, that is my feelings on the Houston Texans based on data. Went through every single data profile for you guys. Be sure to check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/jcoburn. Check out my X, formerly known as Twitter account, at Geometrics, and make sure to purchase the 2024 NFL Draft Analytics Guide available today for purchase. Get that now. Link is in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.